The sun hung stubbornly above the dunes, its glare a shimmering promise of merciless heat. Morella Harlow squinted against its brilliance as she trudged across the cracked earth, boots sinking slightly with each determined step. Her heart thrummed in her chest, a steady beat of resolve laced with a quiet dread. This part of the territory was supposed to be safe, long since forgotten by most travelers, a stretch of desert lying beyond the last outpost of civilization, where even legends seemed to falter and die. But safety, as Morella had learned, was often an illusion, dissipating like morning mist when you searched for it. She adjusted the leather strap of her canteen, curious weight reminding her of both hope and necessity. The wooden spigot had been cracked during yesterday's trek, and fresh water had become a tenuous luxury. She had set out from Dusthaven at dawn. Dusthaven, a modest settlement of weather-beaten shacks and stubborn folk clinging to the edges of a forgotten world. They called it home, though many of them arrived seeking to leave the past and the dangers that haunted it behind. Morella had no illusions about the pull of memory. Every grain of sand here seemed to whisper fragments of stories long buried. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes, Morella. It only buries you deeper. But necessity had driven her westward. The well at the eastern border of Dusthaven had run nearly dry. News had reached her, snatches of conversation around the saloon and over chipped crockery in the general store, of a hidden spring, a secret oasis tucked behind the Red Ridge Formation. She could not ignore that. Supplies were scarce, and every life depended on water. The thought of her younger brother Benton, sputtering with thirst in that shanty they called home, spurred her forward. She paused at the crest of a small rise, shielding her eyes while the heat rippled in waves that danced across the horizon. The desert lay vast and indifferent below, streaked with ochre and gold. Vast dunes rolled like sleeping giants. The wind rasped against her jeans, carrying thorny scents of sage and tansy. Somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard a hawk's call, a mournful sound that stirred something ancient in her memory. Morella withdrew a tattered map from her satchel, flattening it on a nearby rock. The markings were crude, a series of scribbled X's and notations in faded ink. She had risked barter with Alistair Kincaid, the old prospector, trading him half her meager silver for the information. "Trust no one," he'd warned, his breath smelling of whiskey and regret. "The Utes know these lands better than any, and if you cross them, you'll be nothing but a rattlesnake's breakfast." She had nodded, the cold truth of his words settling in her chest like a weight. But there was no turning back now. Squinting, Morella confirmed her bearings. The Red Ridge lay 2 sunrises west of this ridge, beyond a stretch of dunes known locally as the Devil's Teeth, an apt moniker given the jagged rock formations that broke the skyline like bone shards. She tucked the map away, rising with a decisive breath. Her pulse quickened at the thought of potential Ute scouts, but she had ridden this land long enough to sense the nuances of survival. If she moved quietly, observing the patterns of wind and shadow, she could slip past unseen. She would push on until dusk, then set camp, mindful of the dangers that lurked beneath the dunes. Every step felt like a silent prayer. She imagined her father in Dusthaven leaning on his cane, watching for her return. His hands, calloused and strong, had taught her the taste of resilience. She had learned to shoot, to ride, to read the land like any seasoned scout. But the desert asked more than mere skills. It demanded intuition, a willingness to surrender to something larger, something unforgiving. She pressed on, sweat beading at her hairline, sweat the texture of worry. By midday, the heat had risen to an unbearable crescendo. Even the sun seemed to pause at its zenith, a white plate glaring at the world below. Morella dropped to one knee, panting lightly, and unscrewed her canteen. The water inside was already at half capacity, and she swirled the bottle gently, minding each precious drop. She sniffed at its coolness. Gratitude mingled with fear. She would need to press forward, but it was time for a brief rest. Pulling from her satchel a small piece of jerky and a handful of dry biscuits, she ate sparingly, tasting the dust that clung to her lips. The wind rose, shifting to carry a fine haze of red dust across her vision. Morella lifted her gaze, scanning the horizon. It was then she saw him, a figure hunched and indistinct, moving at a pace that betrayed weakness. At first, she thought perhaps a tumbleweed or a mirage, but the figure stumbled, paused, and then continued, a human form staggering across the barren plain. Her heart lurched. Instinct drove her to her feet. Could it be an outlaw, a lost traveler, or her breath caught one of the Utes? She had heard tales of Ute scouts traversing this land, mapping water sources and watching for intruders. To see one here meant she was on dangerous ground. She reached for her revolver, the grip familiar in her hand, but something in her gut whispered caution. Draw too soon, and she might invite hostility. She allowed her gaze to soften, letting empathy eclipse fear for a moment. "Hey," she called out, her voice hoarse but steady. "Over here!" The figure froze, head tilting as if confused by the sound. Then something in his posture shifted. Recognition. Desperation. He lifted an arm and staggered toward her, each step heavy, his head bowed until he stood just 20 feet away. Sweat and grime clung to his weathered skin, etched with lines that spoke of countless hardships. His clothing was tattered, buckskins, torn, his moccasins dusty, as if he had walked for days without rest. Morella lowered her outstretched hand, palm up, as if offering solace. "You look in rough shape," she said, resisting the urge to tighten her finger on the revolver. Her voice was calm, tone measured. "Are you hurt?" He scanned her face, dark eyes flicking with a mixture of caution and relief. Then he reached into a pouch at his waist, withdrawing a small leather flask. It was nearly empty. He hissed through cracked lips, stumbling forward until he reached Morella's side. They were silent for a moment, two strangers bound by thirst and circumstance. She knelt and unscrewed her canteen, careful not to show eagerness. She tipped it, letting cool water pool into her palm. Then she held it out. He paused as though hesitant before leaning forward, tilting his head and drinking deeply. The first gulp drew a soft exhalation, the next a quiet gasp. But he drank, until his throat no longer burned. Morella watched him closely, his shoulders sagged with gratitude, eyes still wary, but less distant. She offered him jerky next, but he shook his head, placing a finger to his lips in a silent plea for water. Alone. She understood, nodded, and patted the ground beside her. "Sit," she said. "Rest. You've been walking a long time." His name was Tenzin, an Ute scout from the Grey Mountain Band. He spoke softly, his words laced with an accent that carried the rhythm of ancient oral histories. Morella's heart tightened. She knew that by aiding him, she risked Dusthaven's fragile peace. Settlers and Ute tribes maintained a tenuous truce, but distrust lingered like smoldering embers. Helping one scout could be interpreted as a betrayal by some. Still, Morella felt that her choice had been made the moment she offered water. She summoned courage and spoke with plain honesty. "I'm Morella Harlow from Dusthaven. I didn't expect to find one of your people here. Are you far from Grey Mountain?" Tenzin's gaze flicked to the horizon, eyes shadowed with pain. "2 suns ago," he said, voice barely above a whisper. He swept a hand across his brow. "We were scouting for water. I left my band at the creek near Devil's Teeth to return with news. But the land, it shifted. The route vanished, like a spirit's trick. I lost my way." Morella's mind raced. If he had been gone from the band for 2 days, they would be searching for him. Worry, anger, desperate determination propelling them. Could her help unite their interests or condemn them both? She spoke with deliberate care, measuring each word. We're heading toward the spring beyond Redridge. I can show you the way, but I will need to know we can trust each other." Tenzin nodded, though his movements were still sluggish. Morella poured more water into his flask, then drew a small cooking pot from her satchel. She set it over a makeshift fire of sun-baked wood and dust, adding scraps of dried vegetables and salted meat she carried for emergencies. The aroma drew Tenzin's parched attention. His eyes softened with gratitude as he watched her work. The stew bubbled, steam spiraling upward like a ghostly wisp. They ate in silence, spooning lukewarm broth into their mouths, tasting the smoky sweetness of desert sage. Morella stole glances at Tenzin's face, strong cheekbones, a mouth shaped by hardship, eyes that held stories she could only surmise. He spoke little, but she gleaned fragments, his loyalty to his band, his fear of being lost entirely, and the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The sun dipped lower, gilding the dunes in a honeyed glow. Morella studied the fading light, aware of how quickly shadows could swallow form. She rose and brushed sand from her pants. "We should make camp soon," she warned, her voice steady. "If we travel at night, we can avoid the worst of the heat and the risk of being seen," Tenzin agreed, standing with a visible effort. He wobbled, and she reached for his arm, steadying him. For a moment he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart stutter. It was not desire or lust. There was no time for such frivolities here. "You owe me your life," he said quietly, eyes reflecting the fire. "My people. They will not forget this." Morella's gaze met his, unwavering. "Then let them come. I've always wanted to see how the Utes fight." She forced a hint of levity, but her pulse trembled at the thought of alien steel and arrowheads ending her days. "Besides, I need water for Dusthaven. That is worth any threat." Tenzin's lips twitched into a ghost of a smile. "Your courage is worth something. Perhaps you will live to see the dawn." Morella gave him a curt nod, refusing to let fear show. She tightened the straps on her backpack and knelt to reinforce the small stone circle around the fire. Sparks flickered upward, dissolving into a velvet sky dotted with distant stars. The Milky Way arched overhead, a river of light spanning the heavens. Morella felt small beneath its brilliance, but she also felt alive. This world, wild and savage, had the power to kill, but also to give meaning to every breath. In the pre-dawn hours, when the air turned icy, Morella roused Tenzin. The moon rode high, an argent sentinel watching over the dunes. Together, they followed the hidden tracks that led toward Redridge. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft crunch of sand beneath their boots and the distant cry of a night bird. Morella's thoughts drifted to Dusthaven, her father's worn face, Benton's pleading eyes. She imagined them standing at the door of their cabin, straining to witness her return. The promise of refreshment, of life, drove her forward. By mid-morning they reached a low saddle between two dunes. Beyond, the spine of Redridge rose like the back of a sleeping creature. Jagged rock formations jutted from the sands, their crimson hues deepening in the fresh light. Morella felt her heart accelerate. The spring had to lie somewhere beyond those rocks, though the map offered no precise location. She wiped sweat from her brow and signaled for Tenzin to move cautiously. The scent of sagebrush grew stronger, mingling with the sharp tang of minerals. Then she heard it, the faintest trickle of water, promising salvation. She paused, her gaze narrowing on a narrow crevice partially concealed by thorny brush. Tenzin stirred beside her, noting her expression. His eyes widened in recognition. Without a word, Morella knelt and brushed aside tumbleweed and sand. Her fingers probed the rocky soil until she felt moisture. She dug, chipping away at stone, with her knife until a rivulet of clear water emerged. Morella exhaled, a breath she had been holding for hours. She knelt and cupped her hands, drinking deeply, tasting the cold sweetness that healed her parched throat. Tenzin collapsed beside her, drinking in turn. Marella watched him, relief washing over her. She loaded her canteen, then filled a small, ceramic jug she carried for the settlement. She wiped water from her face, her reflection rippling in the shallow pool. She could scarcely believe she had found it, an oasis in the heart of a land that refused to forgive. But the moment was fragile. There was no room for triumph here, only vigilance. Marella's heart hammered as she felt a shift in the air, the subtle change that signaled danger. She stood, revolver drawn, eyes scanning the ridge. Somewhere above, movement lingered at the edge of her vision. She tensed, sweat slicking her palms. Tenzin's hand tightened on her elbow. "Utes," she whispered. He shook his head, voice a raspy murmur. "Not ours." Her breath hitched. If the figure was neither settler nor Ute, who prowled these lands? She pivoted to face the ridge, muscles coiled. The rock shifted, and there he was, a lone rider astride a dark horse, silhouetted against the sky's pale blue. He wore a broad-brimmed hat, pulled low, concealing his face. The horse's reins were slack, its gait leisurely, as if the rider surveyed the scene with disdain. Marella's mind raced. Was he a bounty hunter? A thief? A killer? She had her revolver leveled, fingers trembling. Tenzin leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "We must be ready," Tenzin said, voice low and urgent. "He brings more." Marella's heart hammered in her ears. The rider reined in the horse, and 3 figures emerged from the rocky outcrop, bandits, no doubt, drawn by rumors of a hidden spring. Their leader raised a rifle, voice mocking. "Looks like we found ourselves a couple of thirsty fools." Marella raised her revolver, breath steady despite the thunder in her chest. Beside her, Tenzin stood, bow-strung, arrow nocked. The desert held its breath, and then the crack of the rifle echoed across the ridge. Too close. Marella's revolver barked in response. The world blurred in a haze of sand and smoke, but Marella's resolve burned like a beacon. She would protect this water, no matter the cost. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." She would protect this water, no matter the cost. The report of gunfire echoed in Marella's ears, a sharp crack that shattered the fragile stillness of the desert dawn. Her skin prickled as adrenaline surged through her veins. The bandits' rifle had roared, and in that instant everything had pivoted on a knife's edge. The firelight had danced across his face, eyes alight with greed and malice as he leveled his weapon toward her and Tenzin. Marella's finger tightened on the revolver's trigger. The barrel recoiled as she fired, the thunderous blast ripping. Through the hush of the canyon, she saw him flinch, his hat flying backward as the bullet struck his shoulder. The man snarled, clutching at the wound, but he remained upright, staggering only for a moment before pulling back from the edge of the ridge. His 3 companions, grizzled men with sun-cracked faces, emerged from behind boulders, rifles in hand, descending toward the spring with a predator's surety. Tenzin shot an arrow from his bow, the shaft whistling through the air before sinking into the leg of the nearest bandit. He collapsed with a howl, rolling in the sand, but his comrades pressed forward. Marella fired again, then ducked behind a jagged rock, sand kicking up where the bullet had struck the earth. The bandits' shouts rang out, a guttural chorus of triumph and avarice. They believed they held the advantage, strong numbers, the element of surprise, and the promise of water in a land that drank up hope. Marella's heart pounded as she exchanged fire with them. Each bullet she fired was a pact with desperation, an acknowledgement that to lose meant more than death. It meant the loss of something sacred. She risked a glance at Tenzin. He stood inside the small circle of firelight that marked their camp, bow drawn, arrow ready. His posture was lithe, his silhouette a study in controlled ferocity. Together they formed an unlikely alliance. Settler and Ute, soldier and scout, each fighting to guard a fragile lifeline beneath the unyielding sun. The canyon's walls reverberated with the roar of gunshots. A spent casings jingled at Morella's feet. Two high-noon revolver, a weapon she had inherited from her father, the same gun he used to teach her the principles of survival. She thought of his weathered hands guiding hers, the gravelly murmur of his voice. Aim small, Miss Small. Never let them get close enough to read your fear. Fear was a bitter liquor that Morella had almost tasted as the bandits closed in. She reloaded swiftly, the snap of cartridges embedding in her belt as she crouched behind the rock. Her breathing settled into a rhythm. Inhale, exhale, assess. They had 3 opponents now moving into the open. 1 wounded, 2 eager for blood. She squeezed a breath of relief when she saw Tenzin's arrow find its mark again, felling the second bandit, who tried to flank them. The man went down with a groan, but the leader, the one with the wounded shoulder, let out a roar of rage and charged. Morella rose, inhaling the acrid tang of gunpowder and sweat. The rider, he had dismounted now, shook his rifle like a mallet, advancing with a staggered gait that betrayed pain, but not determination. His eyes burned with fanaticism as they settled on her. She swallowed, voice low and steady. Tenzin, cover me. He inclined his head, knocking another arrow. Morella darted from her cover, sprinting toward a cluster of boulders that lay closer to the spring. Her boots skidded in loose sand as she fired into the leader's direction, the bullet grazing his arm. Sparks flew where it struck his leather jacket. The wounded man snarled, turning toward Tenzin. He managed to raise the rifle again, but Morella watched the arrow fly, a shaft tipped with obsidian, black as night. The leader went down, clutched at his chest, then collapsed among the dust, leaving only disturbed sand and rising steam where heat met metal. The desert returned to a brittle silence, punctuated only by Morella's ragged breathing and the soft drip of the spring. Tenzin stood beside her, bow lowered, his expression unreadable beneath the flickering flames. They surveyed the carnage. 2 bandits sprawled at their feet, one struggling to draw breath, the leader unmoving, eyes fixed on the sky. Morella holstered her revolver, chest heaving. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice brittle. Tenzin scanned the canyon, then nodded. "For now." He wiped sweat and dust from his face, revealing a countenance both war-weary and resolute. "But they were part of a larger gang. We have no time to celebrate." She felt a sting of weariness, the cumulative ache of uncertainty that had accompanied her across these dunes. She approached the wounded bandit, the only one still alive. He was young, no more than 20 summers, face contorted in pain. He seemed surprised to see her approach, as if he had expected to die without ceremony. His rifle lay discarded a few steps away, the stock stained with blood. Morella crouched beside him. His gaze flickered between her face and the spring, his lifeline. "You could have killed us," he rasped, mouth dry. She met his gaze, resisting, the urge to voice the truth, that this water was not his, that he had stolen life itself by skirting death to reach it. "We could have," she replied evenly, "but then the spring would have remained guarded, and we would have returned empty-handed." His eyes narrowed, but he made no argument. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. Morella pressed a makeshift bandage to his wound. Taking a needle and spool of thread from her satchel, she traced the cloth over the gash, easeful fingers whipping swift stitches. He winced, but did not cry out. "Why protect me?" he whispered, each word drawn from a furnace of pain. Morella straightened, dusting sand from her jeans. The sun rose higher, painting the canyon walls in strokes of crimson and gold. "Because every life has worth, even yours." She paused, swallowing against the dust in her throat. "Because water is not a prize for the strong, it's a right of the living." He shivered, the cold tremble of fear or respect Morella could not discern. Tenzin stepped forward, placing a firm hand on the bandit's shoulder. "I will return to my band," Tenzin said. "I will tell them what happened. If your gang pursues us, they will know to avoid this spring. Leave now and survive." The bandit's eyes flicked between them. At last he nodded, swallowing. His breath came in ragged gasps. Morella rose, offering a hand to help him to his feet. He looked at her hand, then at Tenzin, before accepting the gesture. They guided him toward the path he had come, the narrow ridge that led out of the canyon. His steps were unsteady, but he moved away, each footfall a surrender. Morella watched until he vanished over the ridge, then let her shoulders sag in exhaustion. Tenzin approached, voice soft as drifting snow. "You have done a good thing." She met his gaze, uncertainty and relief swirling in her own dark eyes. "We still need water for Dusthaven. We can't linger here." He nodded, lifting his bow. "We must fill your containers, then return before the sun's height." The two moved to the spring, filling every vessel and bucket Morella carried. Each movement was deliberate. No haste, no truce with carelessness. The world around them seemed to expand, the air crisp with possibility. Once the caches were full, Morella hoisted her pack, the jug's weight heavy against her back. Tenzin gathered his bow and quiver, casting a glance at the silent corpses of the fallen. "We will need to mark the location," she said, voice low, "so we can return if this water ever runs low again." Tenzin traced a path along a high ledge above the spring, selecting a large, flat stone. He tied a length of leather cord, his mother's gift, and painted a simple symbol, a set of parallel lines intersected by a crescent. The paint was a mixture of crushed red clay and charcoal, bound with animal fat. He pressed it into the rock face, ensuring it would endure heat and sandstorms. "This will guide us," he said. Morella stepped, back, the symbol etched into her memory like a promise. She held the water jug in one hand, the weight a tangible reminder of hope. She met Tenzin's gaze, seeing in it a reflection of her own drive. "Let's go," she said. "We still have miles to cover." They set off, navigating the labyrinth of canyon walls and shifting dunes. The canyon opened into a valley scattered with hardy desert blooms, mesquite and yucca, their spines sharp as regrets. The trail was faint, but Morella's eyes were keen to the terrain's subtle shifts. A slight ridge, a difference in sand coloration, a ghostly outline of a footprint hardened by moonlight. As they moved, Morella felt the full weight of what she carried: jars of water that could save lives, a story of unlikely alliance that might bridge chasms older than the land itself. Tenzin trod beside her, silent sentinel, his thoughts cloaked behind a calm exterior. Doubts flickered in her mind. Would Dusthaven believe her? Would they trust her story of helping a Ute scout? Fear and hope flickered in tandem. The sun climbed high and the temperature soared. They sought shade under an overhang of sandstone, draped with lichen and the bones of long-dead rodents bleached by time. Morella set her pack down, rolling up, her sleeves to expose sun-scorched forearms. She poured water from the ceramic jug into a dented tin cup, sipping reverently. Morella lowered her weapon, heart still pounding. "Sheriff Keegan," she replied, tone cautious. "You came west." He nodded, stepping closer. "Bandits have been prowling these canyons, stirring up trouble. We lost a wagon train last moon. I followed a trail, heard the shots. Are you all right?" She glanced at Tenzin, whose presence beside her was a testament to how far she had traveled. "I am," she said. "But these men," she gestured east, "were after this spring. We drove them off." The sheriff's brow furrowed, gaze darting to Tenzin. Recognition blazed in his eyes. "Is that a Ute scout?" he asked, incredulity tempered by disbelief. Tenzin inclined his head, voice steady but weary. "I am Tenzin of the Grey Mountain Band." Sheriff Keegan's eyes narrowed. "You helped her?" Tenzin nodded. "She saved my life. We have an understanding." Morella stepped between them. "This spring belongs to no one tribe. Water belongs to all, settler or Ute. If we hoard it, we die." The colors of the night sky deepened, framed by the canyon walls. "I have a promise to keep." Keegan studied her, then exhaled as though the weight of his doubts lifted. "You're a brave woman," he said, voice softening. "We'll return to Dusthaven at dawn. I'll make sure your town knows the truth." Morella let the fiery embers calm, tension ebbing from her shoulders. She looked at the spring's location on the map she carried, open to the next notation. A series of small dots forming a trail. Her journey was far from over, but hope illuminated every step. Above, the stars wheeled in silence as the fire's glow faded, leaving only embers. Morella braided strands of determination into her thoughts, forging a promise that would outlast any raid, any prejudice. She would protect this water, and with it, the fragile future of Dusthaven. The desert night closed around them as she crouched by the fire, resolve crystallizing into something unbreakable. Tomorrow, they would ride east, carrying salvation to her people. But the path was fraught with peril, bandits, shifting alliances, and the reckoning that awaited her back home. She stared into the cinders, her heart steeled for what lay ahead. The desert sky had surrendered its colors to night, leaving a tapestry of stars more luminous than any ember. Morella's eyes adjusted to the darkness as she rose, shouldering her pack. Tenzin lay beside her, bow at rest, his breathing even in sleep. The sheriff had insisted on a brief night's rest before they returned to Dusthaven at dawn. Morella permitted herself a moment of respite, but dawn was less than a handful of hours away. She knelt by the spring, the water's surface still, dark as obsidian beneath the moon's pale gaze. She cupped her hands and took a sip. The cold, liquid a balm for her parched soul. The memory of yesterday's battle lingered in her muscles, a dull ache, a burning reminder of how close they had come to losing the water that sustained them. She traced the symbol etched by Tenzin on the ledge above, fingers brushing the carved lines. It felt like a promise, not just between them, but a covenant between settler and Ute, joined by the sacred rites of life. Morella's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the first whisker of morning light teased the sky's edge. The dunes lay silent, sleeping beneath a blanket of sand, undisturbed by yesterday's violence. In the hush, she contemplated the journey ahead. Dusthaven lay nearly a day's ride east, across the Devil's Teeth, through perilous passes and shifting sands. They would need to move swiftly, for rumors of the bandit gang's survivors might reach the sheriff's ears, alerting the raiders to the spring's rediscovered bounty. She gathered a handful of stones, smoothing them between her palms. Each one she placed beside the riverbed to mark the path, a breadcrumb trail for any who came after, signifying both warning and welcome. She thought of her brother Benton, likely fretting by the hearth, whispering prayers for her safe return. She knew he would spring to her door when he heard the hoofbeats of her horse returning to Dusthaven. A breeze stirred, ruffling her dark hair. She felt the weight of expectation settle on her shoulders, protector, savior, liaison between two worlds. In that moment she sensed the fragile equilibrium she balanced, settler and Ute, tradition and progress, life and death. Each step she took rippled across that boundary. She inhaled deep, embracing the dawn's crisp air. "I'm awake," she whispered, voice soft as a vow. Tenzin stirred, lifting his head. The flicker of moonlight revealed his face, contoured by sharp cheekbones and the wisdom of ages. He rose, offering a salute with his bow, before turning to assess the terrain. "The rise of the second day is nigh," he murmured, voice gentle. Morella nodded. "We ride before sunrise. The sheriff is already preparing." She turned to the path behind, where a solitary horse awaited. Its flanks gleamed pale beneath the starlight, nostrils quivering in the cool air. She patted its muzzle, murmuring reassurance. They set out as the sky blushed with the first glow of dawn. The earth beneath their hooves trembled with each step, an unspoken promise of motion, purpose, and resolve. Morella led the way, her eyes sweeping the dunes for any sign of pursuit. Beside her, Tenzin rode in perfect silence, his silhouette a solemn vow. Sheriff Keegan followed at a cautious distance, glancing back now and then to ensure no specter of bandits trailed them. Dusthaven was a 2-day journey, faster if they pushed during daylight and rested under the scant shade of the canyon passes. Morella's mind flitted between strategies: where to ford streams, how to conserve water, which ridges offered vantage points. She had learned these lands from the scratch of runaways and the legends of Ute scouts. Now she employed that knowledge to bring life back to her people. The journey was arduous. The Devil's Teeth loomed ahead, hulking outcrops of jagged rock that tore at the sky like broken bone. The wind howled through the ravines, shredding tents and driving grit into exposed flesh. They navigated narrow trails, where the cliff edge dropped into yawning abysses, and a single misstep meant disappearance. Morella's hands never strayed far from her revolver, her senses attuned to the subtlest rustle of lizard or the scuttle of unseen desert creatures. On the third day, as the sun kissed the world with its harshest light, Morella noticed dust clouds rising from the east, too uniform to be a wandering whirlwind. She halted, pressing a finger to her lips. Tenzin reined in beside her, eyes narrowing. "They approach," he said, tone stark. Morella watched as figures emerged, horsemen in ragged coats, dust-choked faces, rifles slung low. The bandit gang, survivors of the Ridge ambush, had dispatched riders to follow any trail leading to the spring. They must have learned of the leader's fate and Connor's map scribbles. The gang's determination was a cold flame. They would kill to claim the spring's bounty. She turned to the sheriff, who drew his Colt, face ashen. "We cannot outrun them. We have to hide." Morella surveyed the pass, a narrow defile that opened into a dry creek bed. She spurred her horse, urging Tenzin and Keegan to follow. They plunged into the ravine, the steep canyon walls swallowing them. The sky above then seemed a sliver, a ribbon of emptiness. The bandits thundered past the ravine's mouth, oblivious to Morella's hidden presence. Their horses snorted, nostrils flared as they searched the dunes. Morella pressed against the cool stone, heartbeat measured by both fear and confidence. They watched as the bandits vanished into the labyrinth of rock, their voices drifting on the hot wind. Morella exhaled, tension leaking from her shoulders. "We need to cross the pass quickly," she said, dry-mouthed. Her voice was tight. Tenzin nodded. "There is a path that loops through the eastern ridge, a narrow route but safe. The ledge was narrow, barely wider than the width of a horse's hoof." Morella led the team, forcing her steed to step carefully, each hooffall echoing in her mind. Below, the sunlit desert stretched in unending waves, a sea of sand and rock. She felt her pulse in her throat, but she kept moving, eyes fixed on the pass ahead. The ledge spat pebbles as her horse stepped, small rocks clattering into the chasm. Below, they reached the other side, the world opening to a high plateau of cracked earth and twisted junipers. The wind had carved the rocks into spires, each one balanced precariously as if waiting for the final blow. Morella took a moment, head bowed, offering silent thanks to the land that had guided them. But the respite was brief. In the distance, she saw the bandits' dust clouds reappear on the horizon, closer now, like harbingers of violence. She spurred her horse into a controlled gallop, Tenzin at her flank. The sheriff wheezed behind them, sweat and despair mingling on his face. "Keep going," Morella urged. "We must reach Dusthaven before they close the gap." The land sloped downward now, dunes giving way to scrub and sage. They left the twisted junipers behind, entering a broad plain where the sand was firmer. Each hoofbeat carried them closer to safety, but the bandits were relentless. The gap narrowed, measured in heartbeats and beads of sweat. In the distance, Morella saw the palisade walls of Dusthaven, a fortress of weathered wood and iron bolts rising from the earth like a sentinel. Smoke billowed from the chimneys, and she could almost taste the relief of returning to familiar ground. But strength was forged through final trials. She could not let complacency creep into her mind. Suddenly, one of the bandits broke from the formation, his rifle raised. The crack of the rifle ricocheted across the plain. The bullet whined past Morella's head, kicking up sand at her ear. She ducked, heart hammering, and urged her horse faster. She could see the sheriff's horse stumble, spooking into a half-rear before regaining balance. He called out, voice strained, "They're gaining! They'll be on us soon!" Morella swallowed fear, voice resolute. "Tenzin with me, we'll break through. Sheriff, stay low and keep moving." She pushed her steed forward, hooves pounding the earth, muscles straining. The dust clung to her clothes, the wind tearing at her hair. She felt Tenzin's presence beside her, a shield of unwavering focus. The gap narrowed to mere yards when the bandits closed in. 4 riders side by side, rifles leveled. The plain trembled with tension. Morella saw one rider, sweat shine on his brow, terror flickering in his eyes. They had lost sight of hope when they realized she would not die quietly. She reared, aiming. Her revolver. Time slowed, each heartbeat a drumbeat of defiance. She fired, the shot ripping through the air. 2 bandits toppled, focus shattered in their eyes. Tenzin, swift as a striking hawk, loosed his arrows. One found its mark in a bandit's shoulder, another bit into the horse's flank, sending it rearing. The remaining bandits faltered. Dusthaven's walls loomed ahead, gates sputtering smoke from the guards' fires. Morella could almost taste freedom. She charged through the gap, hooves thundering. The wind roared, carrying the smell of wood smoke and distant laughter from the saloon. She dared a glance at the sheriff, whose relief shone bright as the morning star. As they thundered toward the gates, the watchmen cried out, barrels of rifles and shotguns raised. Morella reined in her horse, skidding to a stop just beyond the palisade. The gates swung open, hinges creaking like old bones. She and Tenzin passed through, and the sheriff followed with a wave of relief. The bandits hemmed by the gates, and the guards' aim recoiled. They exchanged glances, survivors of a futile chase. Then, as one, they wheeled away, retreating into the desert that had birthed them. Their dust trails faded beneath the sun's glare, leaving Morella in silence, the echoes of hoofbeats still resonating in her limbs. Morella dismounted, knees trembling as the adrenaline drained. She stood in the center of Dusthaven's main thoroughfare, children peeking curiously from behind fences, townsfolk spilling from the saloon and general store, eyes wide with astonishment. She felt every pair of eyes burn into her, as though they carried the weight of every hope and fear in Dusthaven. Sheriff Keegan approached, clapping her shoulder with firm gratitude. "You did it," he said, voice rough with emotion. "You brought the water home." She nodded, gaze sweeping the crowd. They parted like the Red Sea, revealing a path toward her father's cabin. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, each footfall echoing with the promise of home. The jug of water in her hands felt holy, an artifact of salvation. At the cabin's door, her father stood, cane in hand, eyes glistening. "Morella," he breathed, voice trembling. "You're alive." She opened her mouth to speak, but all that escaped was a choked sob. Her father dropped the cane, crossing the gap to embrace her. Benton's young face emerged from behind their mother's, skirts shining with tears of joy. The jug slipped from Morella's fingers, water spilling onto the dusty floorboards. She observed the pooling liquid, vibrant and dripping with life, her tears mingling with it as she fell to her knees, and above her the sun shone on, a silent witness to a promise fulfilled and the dawn of a new beginning. 2 more. Great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The dawn after Morella's return to Dusthaven unfolded like a long-forgotten dream, the air thick with the scent of fresh-baked bread and the low hum of hummingbird wings. Her father, Tobias Harlow, lingered at the threshold of their cabin, the jug of life-giving water turned upside down at his feet. Each drop that seeped into the weathered floorboards seemed to pulse with hope, an affirmation that the drought-stricken land might live again. Morella's knees pressed into the worn wood, her heart pounding in a fragile equilibrium between relief and the dread that sprang from responsibilities yet unfinished. Her mother, Elspeth, emerged from the shadowed doorway, her eyes gleaming. With tear-laden joy, she placed a hand on Morella's head, her fingers cool and soothing. Behind her, Benton, now a boy no longer shielded by childhood's ignorant bliss, stood wide-eyed. His gaze flicked between his sister and the spilled water, as if trying to reconcile the miracle before him with the parched nightmares he had known. "Tobias," Elspeth whispered, voice trembling with wonder. "She brought it back." He nodded, slowly, every line of his face etched with relief and unspoken gratitude. "She did, our Morella, she did." He sank onto a rickety stool, and Morella offered him a basin to catch the drips. He brushed a knuckle against his lips, his eyes damp. For a moment time suspended, mother, father, daughter, and son encircled by the promise of water's return. Dusthaven awoke as whispers spread from cabin to cabin, sweeping through the settlement like wind-driven smoke. By midday, a congregation had formed at the water trough, and each settler who drank felt renewal coursing through their veins. Torreo Jenner, the crackling barkeeper at the Salty Stallion Saloon, pushed open the swinging doors and called out, "Dave, tell the sheriff, every drop that Morella brought must find its way to the fields." His announcement rippled through the crowd, igniting cheers that rose into the pale sky. Morella watched this scene from the threshold, heart a quivering bird trapped between feathers. She felt the elation of her people, but beneath it lay a rip-tide of guilt and apprehension. She had ventured into a world she barely knew. She had crossed a boundary older than any living memory, the divide between settler and Ute. Tenzin had returned to his band, carrying her promise of solidarity, but she understood that alliances built on desperation were fragile, like ice underfoot. The Ute would witness how Dusthaven treated her scapegoat. If they honored the oath, then the spring might remain a beacon of unity. If not, old wounds would reopen, and blood would flow as freely as water once did. As afternoon's heat melted into a haze, she found herself at Sheriff Keegan's office, a square adobe building crusted with sun-baked clay and memories of law and order. He sat behind his desk, a ledger open before him. Bent quill in hand, he doodled something, his brow furrowed. On the corner of his desk sat a small pouch of tobacco. It sent a reminder of the endless hours he spent tending to grievances and rivalries. He looked up as Morella stepped inside. "Sit, Morella," he said, motioning toward a chair. The floorboards creaked under her weight as she lowered herself, dusting sand from her skirt. Sheriff Keegan clasped his hands, leaning forward. "We've had a meeting with the town's elders. They want to reward you, to grant you land, perhaps an acre near the East Ridge, where the soil is richer. But I wanted your input before we decided." Morella's pulse quickened at the offer. Land meant security, a legacy she could pass to Benton, but the contours of her loyalty tugged in conflicting directions. She squared her shoulders and remembered her vow to Tenzin and the Grey Mountain Band. "Sheriff," she said, voice steady, I appreciate the gesture, but I must ask that you honor the truce with the Ute. They saved this settlement as much as I did. If the elders want to grant land, see to it they grant safe passage for our scouts to that spring. Create a mutual working agreement." The sheriff raised an eyebrow, jotting down a note. "A working agreement? A trade," Morella explained, hands folded. "The Ute have long wandered these lands, established channels for exchange, goods, livestock, perhaps even seeds that grew in their mountain valleys. We have much to learn from each other, and if the water flows, so too can commerce, a bond no rifle can sever." Sheriff Keegan nodded slowly. The sun's rays spilled through a window, illuminating his weathered face. "I'll convene the council tomorrow, but I'll warn you, some of the older settlers won't hear the word Ute without knuckles cracking." He paused, "And there's talk. The bandits we drove off, they may return, but larger, angrier." Morella met his gaze. "Then we'll be ready." She departed the office and stepped onto the dusty street, the sound of laughter and song trickling. Out from the saloon, children chased each other around barrel drums, and the sun painted everything gold. Yet Morella felt the weight of her responsibilities press like a crown of iron. She returned to her cabin, her father tending to the spout where precious water dripped into barrels. Beside him, Benton dug shallow trenches in the soil, each one turned over with fierce concentration. Elspeth smiled, watering seedlings with diluted jugs of the precious liquid. A humble garden was blooming, radishes and lettuces, tiny green shoots that spoke of more to come. Morella knelt, running her fingers through the dirt. She thought of the sun's burn and the storm's mercy in each drop, and understood that nurturing something as simple as a radish could be as heroic as holding a rifle at dawn. But horizons widened beyond her own fields. That evening, as she repaired a worn saddle, a rider materialized from the throat of the canyon, a courier from Grey Mountain. His horse was sweat-spattered and his face grave. As he slowed to a trot in front of her glassy-eyed stare, he raised a sealed scroll. For a moment, she sensed the world hold its breath. She took the scroll with trembling fingers. The seal was the symbol Tenzin had pressed into the rock by the spring, crescent and parallel lines. She recognized it at once. She slit open the scroll, pulling the parchment free. Tenzin's script spread across the page. To Morella Harlow, guardian of the desert's breath. She swallowed as her eyes skimmed. "The Council of Grey Mountain has convened. They request your presence. A bargain has been struck, or will be, under the full red moon. Trust in the water's promise, but know this: not all hearts bend toward peace." Morella's breath hitched, the weight of the summons anchoring her chest. "The gathering is in 3 nights, the courier said gravely. Morella nodded. "I will come." She handed him a purse of silver coins, but he refused. "My message is payment enough," he said, voice low and edged with reverence. He retreated into the haze of twilit sands, leaving Morella clutching the scroll like a lifeline. That night the red moon would ascend, a harbinger of rhythms older than any treaty. As she returned to her cabin, the wind climbed, carrying the scent of juniper and smoke. The community slept beneath knitted blankets, but Morella's mind raced. She lit a small lantern and huddled over a rudimentary map on her table. The moon's cycle guided the dates, and the path from Dusthaven to Grey Mountain wound through dunes and rocky passes. Her heart thudded with purpose and dread, for beyond the promise of alliance lay the spectre of betrayal. She traced a finger along the line that led to the heights, then drew a second to cross the Devil's Teeth. Footsteps sounded behind her. It was Tobias stepping softly into the lamplight. His eyes held both pride and admonishment. "Morella," he said, voice like an echo, "you go back into that desert?" She folded the letter, smoothing its parchment creases. "I must. The Ute seek peace, but others stand against it. If I do not show faith, this water I brought will be wasted, and our land will thirst more than ever." She stood, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Father, I know what's at stake. I'm ready." He searched her gaze, trembling for all he stood to lose. In his eyes flickered memories of his own journey, chinks of light when he had traded steel for trust. He exhaled, nodding. "Then I will not stand in your way. But promise me, do not mistake generosity for weakness. Keep your rifle close and your heart closer." Tears shone in Morella's eyes, but she nodded. She embraced her father, inhaling the smell of worn leather and home. "I promise." At dawn, 3 nights later, she saddled her horse, the Red Moon, full and swollen, waning at its zenith. The population of Dusthaven gathered at the edge of town, some handing her supplies, dried meats, powders, flints, murmuring blessings. A hush fell as she mounted, her silhouette framed by the newborn sun. Tenzin emerged from the crowd, bow strapped across his back, quiver at his hip. He offered a respectful nod. "Are you ready?" he asked. She met his gaze, steely with determination. "I am." They rode into the desert together, each hoofbeat a drum of purpose. The land unfolded like a mosaic, shifting dunes, jagged ridges, hidden ravines. They navigated by the sun's path, heading toward Grey Mountain, where the Utes' council awaited. The path would be long, and the desert promised both wonder and peril. Another voice rose, Tenzin's mother, Ayana, weaving her words with the wind's cadence. "Your journey shows you honor our pledge, but the council has witnessed many false vows. Speak your intention, host of Dusthaven." Morella rose, her back straight. She inhaled the night air, stars a canopy above. "I come to seal our promise with truth. I offer our fields, our craftsmanship, our devotion. We will share seed and steel alike, interweave our future. As long as the water springs, so too does our bond." A murmur rippled through the circle. Chief Wapi's eyes, the color of polished obsidian, measured her. He gestured, and a tall warrior stepped forward, offering a small wooden bowl carved with symbols of rain and life. "Drink," he said. "If you partake, you mark yourself with our trust." Morella knelt and accepted the bowl, its dark wood, smooth as river stone. Tenzin's mother poured clear water from a gourd, the liquid shimmering like liquid moonlight. A hush fell on the assembled Ute as Morella drank, her cheeks hollowing with the embrace of life itself. The moment stretched, and she met each gaze, settler and Ute, bearing the weight of her vow. When the bowl was empty, she raised it, offering silent gratitude. The circle of Ute nodded in unity. Some faces kindled with acceptance, others wary, tempered by history's fierce lessons. Chief Wapi stood, cane planted firmly. His gaze drifted to the red moon, still faintly visible against the black sky. "The spring shall remain shared. Dusthaven's fields will grow, and Grey Mountain's people shall reap the bounty." He paused, and the wind caught his words, like dust in a whirlwind. "But heed this, beyond the spring, darkness gathers. A force moves to claim both water and land. Prepare your hearts for the storm." A hush fell, heavier than desert stone. Morella and Tenzin exchanged glances. The promise of union had been sealed, but already the threads of threat wove through the assembly. As dawn's pale glow stretched across the mountain peaks, the council dispersed, casting lingering glances at the east, where Dusthaven lay beyond. "The devil's teeth." Morella exhaled, the cold air filling her lungs with resolve. Tenzin stood beside her, his eyes distant, focused on the shifting horizon. They began their descent, each step measured, aware that their pact had awakened forces older than memory. The water flowed, but so too did whispers of betrayal, of bandits, regrouping of settlers fearful of a nature that demanded its due, and in the valleys below, shadows moved. Morella's heart hammered with the knowledge that the true test lay before them. Unity was forged in sacrifice, and the next sacrifice would be etched in blood and hope alike. But she had pledged her word under the watchful gaze of Grey Mountain's spirit. There was no turning back. The sun rose over the Devil's Teeth, igniting the peaks in flames of amber. Morella adjusted her pack, securing the bowl they had shared, and mounted her horse. Tenzin mounted his own, bow strapped across his back, the wind tossing his hair like the crest of a wave. As they set off toward Dusthaven, toward a settlement unprepared for what came next, Morella whispered to the red sun, "May this promise hold, even when the ground trembles and the skies weep fire." The ride back to Dusthaven stretched beyond a day, with sandstorms buffeting their progress and the sun blistering overhead. Morella's heart pounded with every hoofbeat, each rhythm a reminder of the fragile peace they had forged. As the Devil's Teeth loomed large on the horizon, their jagged peaks etched against the sky like serrated blades, she swallowed hard, remembering Chief Wapi's warning. Darkness gathered beyond the spring, but they carried unity within their hearts, and that alone drove them onward. Tenzin rode silently beside her, his dark eyes fixed on the path ahead. Every so often he would glance at the bowl they had shared at Grey Mountain, the carved wooden vessel still nestled within his satchel. It was a symbol of trust, but also a silent accountability. Their return carried the weight of an entire band's hopes. Dusthaven's palisade came into view at mid-morning. The settlement lay small in the dust, rows of weather-beaten cabins, the Salty Stallion Saloon's battered sign swinging lazily in a still breeze, and the general store's porch crowded with curious onlookers. As they approached, word spread like wildfire. Tenzin returned, and Morella rode with him. They rode into town in solemn procession. The townspeople gathered in clusters along the main street, whispers rippling through their ranks like water across a still pond. Sheriff Keegan greeted them at the gate. His face was pale but resolute. Behind him, the council of elders awaited, draped in sun-faded coats and worry. When they dismounted, Morella held Kavanagh Sterling's gaze, her lifelong rival, a woman who had once dismissed the Ute as savages and scoffed at the idea of unity. Kavanagh's eyes blazed with anger, but they flickered with something else. Curiosity? Guilt? Morella chose not to dwell on it. She stepped forward, trading a nod with the sheriff before addressing the assembled crowd. "People of Dusthaven," she began, voice carrying across the silent block, "I have returned with a promise from the Grey Mountain Band that the spring remains shared. Our crops will flourish, and their people will come to trade fairly. There will be no more blood drawn over water. But know that this peace demands trust from both sides." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, voices low with relief. Others scowled, hardened by years of hatred. Morella's gaze swept the square, settling on Kavanagh. Kavanagh's jaw clenched, but she did not speak. At that moment, a messenger burst through the crowd, a young rider panting, dust coating his face. In his hand he held a scrap of leather concealing a jagged tear. He pressed forward, demanding the sheriff's ear. Morella stepped aside as Sheriff Keegan took the missive, reading the hastily scrawled words. He turned, eyes widening in disbelief. "They're coming," he said, voice thick with dread. "A raider band, 10 riders descended on Miller's ranch at dawn. They killed one and took livestock. They spoke of a throne of water, and they ride from the east." The word throne stabbed at Morella's heart. She recognized it from the Ute legends, a moniker used by raiders who believed that whoever controlled the spring ruled the desert. Her throat tightened. "We must act," she said, voice trembling with urgency. "If they reach the spring before our ambassadors arrive, they will claim it by blood." Sheriff Keegan nodded, palms flattening on the hilt of his pistol. "Gather. The militia! We ride at once." He turned on his heel and barked orders, and the crowd sprang into motion, men grabbing rifles and horses, women ushering children into homes. Marella approached Kavena, whose face had drained of color. "Will you help?" she asked, each word measured. Kavena met her gaze, chest heaving. She seethed for a moment, then grit replaced rancor. "If the spring is lost, so is everything. I ride with you, Marella." Marella inclined her head, relief, mingling with determination. She returned to Tenzin, who nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We ride together," he said. By midday, 60 men and a handful of women, some packing guns, others armed with pitchforks and unwavering resolve, formed a ragged cavalry. Children and elders watched, faces etched with fear and hope. The raider band could strike at any moment, and the fate of Dusthaven hung in the balance. As the militia rode east, Marella's thoughts tumbled. What drove these raiders to covet a piece of desert? Did they understand the gravity of their quest? She suppressed the impulse to stigmatize them. For many, thirst was a brutal master. The sun baked the land with unrelenting fervor. The sky wreathed in heat haze. They reached Miller's ranch by mid-afternoon. The gates lay broken, one barn smoldering in a pit of blackened debris. Smoke coiled into the heavens like a serpent. The ranch hands lay where they fell, some wounded, some slain, with bodies. As arid as the dust around them, Marella knelt beside the rider who delivered the message, red dust matting his hair. His wound was grave, a clean bullet hole in the shoulder. She tore a strip of cloth from her shirt to bind it. "You're safe," she murmured, pressing to staunch the bleeding. He shivered, eyes glazed, but he nodded. A hush fell as the citizens gathered, hearts heavy with the weight of death and desperation. Sheriff Keegan knelt beside the rider, pressing a flask to his lips. "He spoke of a strange banner," the sheriff said, voice low, "a skull crowned with reeds." Tenzin's gaze hardened. "A sign of the Crow Riders," he declared, voice steeled with cold resolve. "They serve no tribe. They're outlaws who strike at both settler and Ute for power." A low rumble of outrage spread through the militia. Men tightened their grips on rifles, swearing vengeance. Marella rose, dusting her hands. She met each gaze with fierce determination. "We cannot let them reach the spring. We ride now." She climbed atop a chuck wagon that had survived the chaos and took the reins. "Dusthaven's future depends on us." The militia surged forward, hooves and dust trailing behind like a battle cry. They pressed deeper into the plains, following the Crow Riders' trail. Hoofprints marred with urgency, shelter cowered. Beneath acacia trees and the crops of Miller's ranch lay trampled, a testament to staggering callousness. The sun tumbled toward evening, and the heat wages war on flesh and bone. Yet Marella refused to slacken pace. Each rider rode with grim purpose, urgency snapping in the air like a taut bowstring. Their pursuit led them to a ridge overlooking the canyon's mouth, where the spring's hidden oasis soaked the earth in unseen splendor. They paused at the ridge's crest. Marella dismounted, trousers dusted, and walked to the precipice. Below lay the spring, its waters glimmering like a fallen star. She exhaled, relief warming her chest, until she saw the Crow Riders. 10 figures stood at the canyon's edge, clad in black scarves tied around their necks, their hats broad-brimmed and wicked as crow wings. They held rifles with savage ease, and one bore the sinister banner Tenzin had described, a skull of bone with reeds sprouting from its temples. Marella's blood froze. If they crossed into the canyon, they would claim the spring. The militia, below the ridge, counted 50 riders, Dusthaven's defenders, but neither number nor skill would guarantee victory. The Crow Riders fought with desperate cunning and had nothing to lose. She turned to the militia, her voice a blade forged in steel. "Form a line, defend the pass." Her father's face appeared, stoic beneath the brim of his worn hat. He grasped a rifle, hands shaking slightly. Elspeth knelt beside Benton, pressing a pistol into her son's young hands. The children were nowhere to be found. They sheltered inside the cabins, wide-eyed but safe. Marella climbed atop a boulder, revolver holstered at her hip, rifle raised. She fired a warning shot into the air, a sharp crack that echoed through the canyon. The Crow Riders responded with a volley, the smoke curling over the lip of the ridge, and two of Morella's militia fell, their bodies rocketing back against the rock face. A scream cut through the air. Agnes Porter struck in the leg. Morella saw blood bloom like a cruel flower. Instant adrenaline flared in her veins. She ducked, weaving behind cover, then raised her rifle and fired. The bullet snapped off a stone, near a Crow Rider's mount, spurring the horse into a whinny of fear. The rider's hat flew off, revealing a jagged scar across his brow. The battle erupted. The sun bled into the canyon, casting long shadows on the sand. Rifles cracked like thunder, sending smoke curling upward. The militia pressed the Crow Riders back, but the outlaws fought with relentless savagery, prowling like wolves in that canyon's mouth. Each gust of wind carried the stink of powder and sweat. Mixing with the scent of blood and fear, Morella fired again, her aim steady despite the chaos. Beside her, Tenzin loosed arrows that screeched through the air like banshees. His first arrow found its mark in a rider's shoulder, felling him with a strangled cry. The second shattered a rifle stock with a crack that rang louder than the cries of the wounded. Dust and tension churned the air. The rifle smoke blended with the civil dawn, painting the sky in ghostly greys. A Crow Rider lunged forward on horseback, saber gleaming, eyes black with hatred. He reined his horse toward Morella's father, a natural target with his rifle at hip and no chance of retreat. Instinct drew Morella forward. She raced down the pitch, ignoring each bullet's scream. Her heart roared, drowning the cacophony. Her father spun, eyes widening in a wordless plea. Morella fired from the hip, the shot blasting through the outlaws. A torso knocking him backward off his horse. Dust rose around them in swirling eddies. Time fractured. Morella dove, grabbing her father, pulling him aside as the saber's arc severed the air, stamping a whisper in its wake. The outlaw with the rifle sneered, eyes alight with malicious delight, until an arrow pierced his eye, dropping him like a marionette with cut strings. The silhouette above her prevented her from seeing Tenzin's form, but the echo of his arrow's impact confirmed his presence. The outlaw's rifle discharged as his body fell. The buckshot ricocheted off a nearby boulder, sending sparks dancing like fireflies. More gunfire cracked, but the tide of battle shifted. The militia regained their footing, pushing the Crow Riders back into the canyon's mouth. Morella rose, voice ringing out, each word drenched in the sweetness of triumph and the bitterness of loss. "Fall back!" she yelled, raising her rifle. For the final volley, the militia obeyed, forcing the Crow Riders into a final stand near the spring itself, a narrow choke point where horse and rider jostled for position. Morella's rifle spoke with a voice of thunder, each shot finding its mark. Tenzin's arrows rained death. In minutes, the Crow Riders lay crumpled among the sand, lifeless corpses and dying men. The outlaw leader fell last, his skull splitting under a rifle butt. The banner with the skull and reeds burned on a stake nearby, its ashes swirling like a dark omen. As the dust settled, the canyon lay silent once more, the sun's gold seeping across the ridges. Morella stood at the spring's rim, blood spattered. Across her trousers, rifle trembling in her hands, Tenzin knelt beside a wounded militiaman, pressing a clean bandage to his thigh. The air hummed with relief and mourning. Sheriff Keegan appeared, lantern in hand. Though it was still day, his battered features spoke of sleepless nights and unrelenting duty. He approached Morella, each step heavy with exhaustion. "It's done," he said, voice tired but resolute. Morella nodded, sanitizing her rifle butt in dust. "We saved the spring." She exhaled, and the world exhaled with her. The water's surface rippled where the battle's echoes still lingered. She knelt, scooping handfuls into her palms, tasting the victory's liquid promise, cold, sweet, and untainted. Below, the canyon's walls stood like silent sentries, guarding the secret that had become their salvation. The militia gathered, eyes wide at the sight of the spring's undisturbed waters, now glowing alive under the sun's unrelenting gaze. Tenzin rose, bow at his side, spine straight and unwavering. Morella dusted sand from her boots, then walked to her father, kneeling beside him. He looked up, eyes glistening, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "We live," he whispered. She nodded, tears pressing against her lids, a vow, a testament. She rose and faced the assembled militia, her voice carrying across the canyon's hushed expanse. "Dusthaven shall stand. We will share this bounty with our brothers of Grey Mountain. As long as the spring flows, so too shall our bond." The militia cheered, voices rising like a gale. The echo of their triumph reverberated across the sands, scattering the ghosts of war back into the bones of the earth. They returned to Dusthaven under a sky painted with the colors of dusk. At the gates, the townspeople waited, some weeping, some cheering. Kids hugged their mothers, women wept tears of relief, and men clasped shoulders in solemn pride. Morella's father greeted her with a nod thicker than words. She returned his salute with a weary smile. At the Salty Stallion Saloon that night, they celebrated quietly. No wild revelry, only hushed laughter and toasts poured in the spring's water. Morella sat beside Tenzin, each holding a cup, their gazes meeting across steam-lit tables. He lifted his cup, his voice soft. "To unity." She clinked her cup against his, exhaling relief. "To unity." But neither believed the road ahead would be smooth. Storm clouds gathered beyond the horizon. Bandits scattered, but others would come. Prejudice lingered in hardened hearts, and the desert's tests were far from over. Yet in that moment, under the flickering lamp, Morella allowed herself to believe that for once, blood had not been shed in vain. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. As the night deepened and the saloon's lights dimmed, Morella stepped outside, standing beneath the constellation-laced sky. She gazed at her reflection in the fountain's water, eyes reflecting the scars of battle and the promise of peace. Tenzin joined her, silent as a shadow. They looked toward Grey Mountain, its silhouette carved in obsidian. The path they had trodden now lay behind them, tested by sand and flame, carved by hope and sacrifice. "Will they come?" Morella asked, voice soft. He studied the horizon, then back at her. "As long as the spring flows, we will come, together." She nodded, understanding that the journey was far from over. But as she cupped the water in her hands, letting it trace across her fingers, cold and alive, she knew that unity, once tasted, was an ember that refused to die. In the first light of dawn, they would ride to Grey Mountain once more. For treaties must be sealed in action, not just words. And as the night wore on, Dusthaven drifted to sleep, each dream cradled by the promise of water, the bond of trust, and the resilient heart of a girl who had fed a thirsty Ute scout and forged a destiny for both their peoples. Morella stood at the edge of the clearing, the bitter wind of dawn biting through the layers of her coat as she watched the first pale rays of sunlight gild the summit of Grey Mountain. The air was thin and charged with expectation. Below, the camp of the Grey Mountain Band lay quiet, teepees arranged in a loose circle, their entrance flaps fluttering like silent banners in the breeze. Between each fire pit, embers glowed faintly as if reluctant to surrender to daylight, and a light haze of smoke curled skyward, mingling with the morning mist that hugged the mountain's slopes. Her gloved hands trembled as she adjusted the worn leather strap of the treaty pouch slung across her chest. Inside lay the parchment they had signed in Dusthaven's council chamber, the ink still fresh with the weight of promise. Alongside it rested the bowl she had shared with Tenzin under the red moon's gaze, its carved symbols still glinting with traces of the sacred water. The bowl was wrapped in soft cloth, a gift from Tenzin's mother, Ayana, to seal the covenant between their peoples. Unwrapping it would be the final gesture that bound settler and Ute in a shared fate of prosperity and peace. Morella inhaled, her breath condensing into a small puff of white before dissipating into the chill air. Her boots scraped against loose gravel as she stepped toward the heart of the camp, where a circle of elders had already begun to gather. Each face she passed carried the weight of history, lines carved by sorrow and joy, eyes bright with cautious hope. These were souls who remembered the old wars, the stolen horses, the broken treaties, generations who bore scars deeper than any blade could carve. She felt her pulse thrumming in her ears as she recalled Chief Wapi's words. Beyond the spring, a darkness gathers. Your unity will face its greatest test here under the full moon. The red moon had waned, but its warning lingered in her mind like a drumbeat, steady, insistent, reminding her that the promise they made would be tested by doubt and fear. Taking a steadying breath, Morella stepped into the center of the clearing. The circle of elders parted, revealing Chief Wapi seated on a low wooden stool carved with the image of a mountain goat, symbols of endurance and vigilance. His posture remained erect, cane resting across his lap, eyes shining with the wisdom of years. On either side of him sat runners of prestige, messengers who bore news between bands, each draped in woven blankets, their braided hair crowned. With eagle feathers, Morella's gaze flickered to Tenzin as he approached from the periphery, moving with quiet confidence. He knelt beside her, bow resting across his knees, his face a study in resolve. She placed a hand on his shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. His dark eyes met hers, reflecting the same mixture of nerves and unwavering belief. A silence. Settled, the waiting was as taut as arrow string. Then Chief Wapi rose, his voice carrying over the dewy grass and echoing against the mountain's slopes. "Bring forth the bowl of water," he instructed, his tone a resonant mix of authority and ceremony. Two young runners, their faces solemn, stepped forward bearing a wooden tray. Upon it rested the intricately carved bowl, wrapped in aged leather. They knelt, placing it at Morella's feet. Tenzin shifted, offering his hand to unbind the cloth. Morella knelt beside him, gingerly peeling back the binding to reveal the bowl's smooth exterior. The symbols, parallel lines intersecting with a crescent, gleamed faintly where the dawn light caught them. She traced each carving with her gloved fingertips, as if committing the ritual's promise to memory. Her thoughts drifted to Dusthaven, her father's jubilant tears, Benton's untroubled laughter, the settlers and the Utes raising toasts beneath the salty stallion's low wooden beams. She recalled the rises of dawn they had crossed together, the devil's teeth that had tested their resolve, the narrow ridges that almost broke their horses, the ambush at the spring where blood and water had mingled at her feet. Those memories now felt like a tapestry, woven with threads of hope and sorrow, far removed from the gravity of this moment. She drew a deep breath, lifting the bowl with reverence. As she rose, the elders fell silent, their gazes shifting from her to Tenzin and back again. Morella's heart thundered as she approached the center of the circle. Chief Wapi inclined his head. "Speak your vow, guardian of Dusthaven." Morella's voice caught as she knelt before the chief. The bowl rested on the ground, its mouth tilted toward the sky. She closed her eyes, recalling the offerings she had made at her father's porch, a sprig of dried sage, a handful of blessed soil, each a symbol of respect for the land's ancient spirit. Opening her eyes, she placed both palms upon the rim of the bowl. Her breath settled and she began to speak, her voice steadying with the weight of her conviction. "I, Morella Harlow of Dusthaven," she said, each word deliberate, "stand before you to affirm the bond between our peoples. As long as this water flows, so shall our unity remain unbroken. We share this land's bounty, its fields, its livestock, its labor, and pledge to honor the ways of those who walked these trails long before any settler came. A hush lay over the assembled band, the only sound the faint rustle of sagebrush. In the morning breeze, she continued, we accept the wisdom of your people, Chief Wappi, and offer the strength of ours. Let the crops and hands that sow them feed the mouths of Ute and settler alike. Let our children learn from one another, speak each language, share each knowledge. Morella felt her throat tighten as emotion crested within her. She drew another breath, resisting the urge to let tears spill. The elders watched, impassive as mountains, but Morella sensed their approval in the quiet dignity of their gaze. She lifted the bowl to her lips, tipping it to let the icy water spill between her teeth. The liquid slipped past her tongue, a cold and holy fire that blossomed in her belly. A single drop traced its path down her chin. She closed her eyes, savoring the essence of the vow, letting its promise settle into her bones. Beside her, Tenzin mirrored the gesture, sipping the water with equal reverence. When he set the bowl down, he pressed his palms to the earth, offering a silent prayer, an unspoken tribute to the spirits of mountain and stream. Chief Wappi stepped forward, cane thudding softly against the grass. His lined face relaxed into a small, approving smile. He extended his hands, palms upward, and gestured to the elders behind him. Two of them stepped forward, each carrying a small sack of maize seeds and a bundle of furs strapped with sinew. These are gifts from Grey Mountain, Chief Wappi said, his voice resonating across the dawn-lit clearing. Offerings to Dusthaven, seeds to plant in your fields, furs to keep the winter's cold at bay. Take them in friendship and sow them in cooperation. Morella rose, accepting the maize with both hands. The weight of the seeds was cool and earthy. Tenzin took the furs, draping them over Morella's shoulders before settling them on the ground beside her. A murmur ran through the circle, voices humming with satisfaction. The ceremonial act had ended, but its resonance lingered like a chord. Struck in the heart, Chief Wappi's gaze swept over Morella, his eyes reflecting an unspoken challenge. Remember this day, Morella Harlow. The covenant is sealed not by words alone, but by deeds. When spring thaws, the earth and the rains fall, teach your people to uplift ours. And when winter's frost bites deep, let us return the favor. In this exchange, we shall honor the balance of life and land. Morella inclined her head, voice firm. I promise, Great Mountain. As the ritual concluded, the sun rose higher, its rays banishing the final tendrils of mist from the camp. The elders dispersed, their robes rustling like leaves in an autumn breeze. The younger runners gathered around Tenzin, patting his shoulder and murmuring in their native tongue. Morella felt a swell of pride at the sight. Her closest ally surrounded by his people, a living testament to what unity had wrought. Yet the spectre of Chief Wappi's warning loomed. Darkness gathers beyond the land, and the covenant will face its greatest test. That test was not over yet. She could feel it, a tension in the air, as if the land itself exhaled a cautionary breath. There were those who had not joined this circle. Amiss among the Ute were dissenters who saw settlers as enemies encroaching on sacred ground. And in Dusthaven lingered the restless ears of men like Kavena Sterling, whose skepticism and ambition could provoke a return to old hatreds. Morella rose from the earth, brushing loose soil from her kneecaps. She walked to where Tenzin's mother, Ayana, stood, her gaze both maternal and inscrutable. Ayana's dark eyes, framed by the fine lines of age, held both warmth and a hint of reproof. You have done well, child of Dusthaven, Ayana said in soft Ute, her voice patterned like a mountain wind. Morella felt the song of the language more than its literal meaning, each syllable an echo of tradition. But remember, the bowl was but a vessel. Its contents are now gone. Now the spirit within must dwell in your deeds. Will you nurture what has begun, even when the path grows thorny? Morella met her gaze, feeling the gravity. She nodded, voice steady. I will tend this promise as I tend my father's fields. I will show Dusthaven and Grey Mountain that we are bound by more than necessity. We are bound by the land itself. Ayana's lips quirked in a maternal smile. She placed a hand on Morella's shoulder, her fingers warm beneath the chill of dawn. Then go and carry the light of this day into the valleys below. But guard your heart. Even the brightest flame can be snuffed by doubt. Morella exhaled, absorbing the weight of those words. She stepped back and turned toward the path descending the mountain's eastern face, where the canyon walls stretched like protective arms toward Dusthaven. Tenzin joined her, boughs slung across his back, his presence a comfort and a reminder of the trials they had already faced. They began their descent, leaving behind the smell of conifer and cold earth. Each footfall echoed with history, Ute feet that had tread this path for generations, and her own, new yet resolute. The early sun blazed overhead, illuminating the world in stark contrast, revealing every crag and crevasse. Within the descent, Morella's thoughts turned to the threats that lay in wait. Bandits would test the strength of their union. A coalition of Ute renegades embittered by old betrayals might see this treaty as an affront, and Dusthaven's own citizens harbored unease. Kavenna Sterling's eyes gleamed with ambition, and she would not suffer peace to threaten her position. Morella steeled herself, knowing her next challenge would be to ensure both communities honored the trust forged here. The first leg of the descent took them through Nunara, narrow canyons hewn by centuries of wind and rain. At times, the walls closed in so tightly that sunlight fell only in slender beams, leaving the passage cool and silent. The echoes of their footsteps bounced and scattered, as if testing whether they had the right to be there. A sudden rustle caught Morella's attention. She halted, hand on her rifle's holster. A branch snapped and then another. From the corner of her eye she glimpsed movement, 3 figures stepping from the shadows. Their lean frames were cloaked in worn buckskin jackets, faces painted, with streaks of ochre and black. In their belts hung knives and tomahawks, implements of war. Tenzin's hand fell to his bowstring, arrow knocked in an instant. Morella raised her rifle in unison, her heartbeat surging. The figures lowered their weapons, however, assuming non-threatening postures. The leader, a wiry man with piercing amber eyes, stepped forward. "You carry the bowl," he said in Ute, voice low and gravelly. Morella recognized him from the Elder's circle, Hehaya, runner of distinction. His gaze flicked to Tenzin, then back to her. Morella didn't lower her rifle, but she held it loosely. "Hehaya," she replied, switching to halting Ute, each phrase cautious. "I honor your name and your people. We journey to Dusthaven to share our promise." Hehaya scanned her features, suspicion coiling in his gaze. Many doubted this. "Alliance! The bowl is gone, but its spirit hold fast." He took a step back, and his companions unslung bows, arrowheads gleaming. They were scouts, charged with testing the integrity of both her words and her resolve. Morella nodded, lowering her rifle slightly. "I understand. Ask what you will." Hehaya's eyes narrowed. He studied her posture, the set of her shoulders, the way her eyes held his without faltering. After a moment that stretched like a canyon river, he signaled his companions. They relaxed, lowering their bows. "Then ride on with honor," Hehaya said, stepping aside to reveal the path forward. "The elders will hear of this." Morella exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. She inclined her head once, solemnly, before moving on with Tenzin at her flank. The scouts melted back into the shadows, leaving only the echo of their presence. The descent continued through a series of switchbacks, each one easing them closer to the sun-drenched valley below. The air grew warmer, red rocks giving way to scrub and sagebrush. As they neared the canyon's mouth, Morella's gaze swept the landscape. Dusthaven's palisades lay visible, a thin line of dark posts stretching across the plain like a heartbeat. In the earth's veins, pulling her horse to a halt, she turned to Tenzin. "We have to move quickly. I need to speak with Sheriff Keegan and the council before the day ends." He nodded, bow resting across the horse's crupper. "We will face any who challenge us." As they resumed, word of their arrival spread. Across the valley, smoke rose from the chimneys, tethered to the horizon by lazy plumes. The plain's ochre expanse sparkled with anticipation, as if the land itself rejoiced in the promise of peace. Entering Dusthaven's gates was like walking into a living tapestry of human emotion. The guards at the gate, a young man, Morella, recognized from the militia, saluted crisply before dropping to one knee. Beyond the palisade's threshold, children dashed through the thoroughfare, weaving between carts laden with fresh vegetables, their laughter carrying like birdsong across the dry air. Morella dismounted, knees trembling as she stepped onto the guardrail's stone plinths. Dust settled at her boots, swirling in miniature vortices as she passed. Tenzin followed, leading his horse with calm certainty. Townsfolk emerged from the saloon and general store, faces shining with novelty, Ute and settler standing side by side. In the center of the square, a wooden dais had been erected. Upon it sat a council table carved from a single pine trunk, its grain a swirl of ages. Sheriff Keegan stood behind it, quill in hand, inhaling dust with every breath. Beside him stood Morella's father, Tobias Harlow, his face proud yet defiant as he observed the crowd. Rabin, the merchant, leaned against a crate of goods bound for Grey Mountain, his usual skepticism replaced by guarded hope. Even Kavena, Sterling, lingered at the edge, her arms crossed over a linen shirt stained by flour, her eyes bright with fierce curiosity. Morella ascended the dais, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would drown out her voice. Tenzin mounted the platform's edge, stepping down to stand beside her, an emblem of solidarity that drew whispers from the assembly. Sheriff Keegan cleared his throat, voice carrying across the square. "Citizens of Dusthaven," he began, "and honored members of the Grey Mountain Band of Ute, we stand today on the threshold of a new chapter. Our bond, forged in blood and water, has endured its first trials. Now we renew our vow, tested by fire and tested by steel." His gaze found Morella's. "Guardians of this covenant, speak your words." Morella stepped forward, unfastening the treaty parchment from the pouch. She held it aloft, the early sun glinting on the seal's crimson wax. Each council member leaned forward, their expressions taut with expectation. She inhaled, voice steady but rich with emotion. "People of Dusthaven, we have traveled far under Grey Mountain's watchful eye to deliver our promise. The spring shall remain open to all, its waters a bond that binds our futures. Ute and settler will share the fields, share the harvests, share the honor." She turned, presenting the parchment to Chief Wapi, who stood to her left. Wapi accepted it, his gnarled fingers brushing the inked words. Morella watched as he examined the parchment, the deep lines of age flickering with approval in his expression. She continued, "I pledge, in the presence of witnesses, that no settler will seize the spring by force or by stealth. And in return, the Grey Mountain Band pledges that no arrow will fly toward this town without the voice of reason first spoken." A murmur rose, unsettled but hopeful. Kavena Sterling's eyes sparked, whether with doubt or anticipation. Morella could not tell. She took a breath, letting her gaze sweep the crowd. "Rabin," she said, directing her words toward the merchant who stood against his crates, "will you extend trade to Grey Mountain? Will you accept their furs and horses as equal in value to our wheat and cattle?" Rabin's skeptical brow lifted, and he straightened, stepping forward. He considered her with narrowed eyes, and the sun glinted on the flecks of grey in his beard. "I will," he said after a heartbeat. "Smoke and grain for hides and pelts. Your people will see value where once there was fear." Morella nodded, relief blooming like a desert rose. She looked to Kavena, whose lips parted as if to speak. Kavena's voice rang out, clear and sharp as a striking flint. If we are to bind our fates with the Ute," she said, stepping forward onto the dais' edge, "then let us prove it now, this day. I will lead a group of volunteers to the spring. We will meet the runners of Grey Mountain, and we will harvest barley seeds together, settler and Ute, before the sun sets. Let this act be the seal of our solidarity, or let our doubts be proven right." A hush fell, tension taut as the string of a bow. Morella met Kavena's gaze, searching for the intent behind the challenge. Instead of malice, she saw determination, an unspoken desire to prove herself on behalf of all who doubted. Morella lowered her rifle, exhaling with the release of taut tension. She modulated her breath as though she had emerged from deep water, gasping for air. Tenzin approached, eyes scanning the scene for lingering threats. Kavena joined them, weapon slung low, her gaze locked on the fallen renegades. The settlers, still shaking with adrenaline, gathered near the spring, forming a protective ring around it. Chief Wapi's voice boomed from the ridge above. "Those who oppose our peace will be judged by the council. This spring is under our watch." The renegades glared, then lowered their heads, understanding that their moment of fury had been swallowed by a firmer resolve. A hush fell that was heavier than any storm. Morella's shoulders sagged as the gravity of the moment settled upon her. She turned to Kavena, who nodded curtly. No words were necessary. Miliginas and Ute plunged into motion, binding the wrists of the renegades with braided cords of sinew. The dissenters would face justice under the new alliance, their fate a testament to the covenant's sanctity. The sun's arc climbed higher, and in the shimmering heat, the act of planting seeds in the canyon floor held out the promise of rebirth. Morella knelt, brushing dust from the seed rows, ensuring that no clod of earth remained unturned to steal the grain's chance to grow. Kavena knelt beside her, placing an arm around her shoulder. "You led us through hell," Kavena whispered, voice thick. "I never believed it could be done." Morella's gaze softened, gradations of exhaustion and relief mingling in her dark eyes. "Hope is stronger than doubt," she replied, fingertip grazing the young barley sprouts already breaking the surface. Kavena squeezed her shoulder. "Then let it grow." She rose, step by measured step, scanning the horizon. "We will face their justice, those renegades, and then we will forge the future we dared to plant." Tenzin joined them, his presence a quiet echo of solidarity. "I will remain until the renegades stand trial," he said, gaze fixed on the captive dissenters. Morella exhaled, pressing her palm against the cool water. "I will go home to Dusthaven, but I will return for the verdict and to guard these fields." She rose, letting the morning's labor be a testament to their unity. As she turned, words snapped past her, cries of approval, muted sobs of joy, the low murmur of conversation in both Ute and English. A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of growth. 10 days later, Dusthaven's council convened beneath the shade of a solitary cottonwood. The renegades were brought forth in a caravan, Ute elders riding beside them, flanked by militia. The assembled townsfolk watched with a hush that crackled in the midday heat. Chief Wapi's runners arrived at the edge of the council circle, bearing the cleared path for justice. Morella sat beside Kavena and Tenzin, her gaze steady as Tobias Harlow took his place at the dais, flanked by Sheriff Keegan and Rabin. The two, Renegades knelt before them, eyes lowered, the weight of their actions pressing upon them like a heavy stone. Tenzin stepped forward, voice measured. "These men who opposed our unity are brought before you to answer for their crimes." He looked at the oldest of the renegades, Wikasa, a former runner with lines deeper than a river gorge. "Do you deny your actions at the spring?" Wikasa's gaze met Morella's, his golden brown eyes flickering with what might have been regret or defiance. He answered in Ute, his tone subdued. "I sought to protect my people from an encroaching tide, but I acted without counsel or honor." Silence settled as the council absorbed his words. Sheriff Keegan spoke next, baritone and solemn. "You murdered for brook and blood, threatening the peace we forged. You are guilty of attempted murder, destruction of property, and desecration of sacred trust." He turned to the council elders, awaiting their judgment. Chief Wapi's voice, clear as a mountain wind, broke the hush. "You shall serve among the fields for a season, tilling, planting, tending the young barley until its harvest. You shall be bound by our laws and the council's gaze. Should any harm befall this land or its people again under your hands, let your fate be taken by the waters themselves." The council nodded, concurrence and justice coiling in the midday air. Wikasa knelt, chin pressing against his chest, acceptance rippling across his features. The other renegades offered no protest. They had been beaten not by bullets, but by the resolve of unity. Morella exhaled, her heart uncoiling. She glanced at Kavanagh, whose expression was unreadable, satisfaction tempered with lingering skepticism. Yet in that moment, Morella recognized the transformation that had taken place. A woman who once scoffed at the Ute now stood witness to justice in their shared name. When the council adjourned, a cheer rose from the townspeople and Ute alike. An unexpected sound, a testament to convergence rather than division. Children ran through the crowd, their laughter bright as the sun. Morella stepped away from the dais, her father's hand resting on her shoulder. "You have done more than you know," he said softly. "You've changed this place." She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "We have changed it, together." Tenzin approached, placing the wooden bowl, empty now, into her hands. Its carved symbols gleamed in the sunlight, the wood warm beneath her fingers. She ran her thumb across the crescent, each line. Morella lowered her rifle, exhaling with the release of taut tension. She modulated her breath as though she had emerged from deep water, gasping for air. Tenzin approached, eyes scanning the scene for lingering threats. Kavanagh joined them, weapon slung low, her gaze locked on the fallen renegades. The settlers, still shaking with adrenaline, gathered near the spring, forming a protective ring around it. Chief Wapi's voice boomed from the ridge above. "Those who oppose our peace will be judged by the council. This spring is under our watch." The renegades glared, then lowered their heads, understanding that their moment of fury had been swallowed by a firmer resolve. A hush fell that was heavier than any storm. Morella's shoulders sagged as the gravity of the moment settled upon her. She turned to Kavanagh, who nodded curtly. No words were necessary. Miliginas and Ute plunged into motion, binding the wrists of the renegades with braided cords of sinew. The dissenters would face justice under the new alliance, their fate a testament to the Covenant's sanctity. The sun's arc climbed higher, and in the shimmering heat, the act of planting seeds in the canyon floor held out the promise of rebirth. Morella knelt, brushing dust from the seed rows, ensuring that no clod of earth remained unturned to steal the grain's chance to grow. Kavanagh knelt beside her, placing an arm around her shoulder. "You led us through hell," Kavanagh whispered, voice thick. "I never believed it could be done." Morella's gaze softened, gradations of exhaustion and relief mingling in her dark eyes. "Hope is stronger than doubt," she replied. fingertip grazing the young barley sprouts already breaking the surface. Kavanagh squeezed her shoulder. Then let it grow. She rose, step by measured step, scanning the horizon. We will face their justice, those renegades, and then we will forge the future we dared to plant. Tenzin joined them, his presence a quiet echo of solidarity. I will remain until the renegades stand trial, he said, gaze fixed on the captive dissenters. Morella exhaled, pressing her palm against the cool water. I will go home to Dusthaven, but I will return for the verdict and to guard these fields. She rose, letting the morning's labor be a testament to their unity. As she turned, words snapped past her, cries of approval, muted sobs of joy, the low murmur of conversation in both Ute and English. A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of sage and the promise of growth. 10 days later, Dusthaven's council convened beneath the shade of a solitary cottonwood. The renegades were brought forth in a caravan, Ute elders riding beside them, flanked by militia. The assembled townsfolk watched with a hush that crackled in the midday heat. Chief Wapi's runners arrived at the edge of the council circle, bearing the cleared path for justice.